So I love the Haftarah. Not just this one in particular, but in general, I love the often neglected Haftarah text, which comes after the Torah reading and before the candy throwing. Jewish tradition has assigned a selection of the book of prophets to each Torah reading. And today's Torah reading is from the book of Numbers. The Haftarah is from the book of Hosea. And to be honest, Hosea is not one of the major prophets that you might have heard of, Samuel and Isaiah, Ezekiel. But there are verses in today's Haftarah that I want us to explore. And along the way, we are going to learn a little bit about Tefillin as well. For those who don't know, these are Tefillin. I know someone in there is going to be like, oh, it's muksa, you can't touch it on Shabbat. But don't worry, these are not kosher tefillin, so it's okay. So actually, it's pretty neat that the bottom is off, and if you want to see the inside of the tefillin, you can come after and actually see all the divisions, and you see the parchment. But this is one part of the tefillin here. That they are worn in the weekday morning prayers and are part of the fulfillment of the verse from Deuteronomy, Ukshartem leod al yadecha v'hayu latotafot b'neinecha. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them be a symbol before your eyes. So how do we get there, though? Our Haftarah today speaks of the rift which has been created between the Jewish people and God. But there will be a time when God and the Jewish people will find their way back together to each other. Hosea describes that renewed time when the connection will be restored not only with the people, but also all creation. At that time, Hosea says, even war will be banished. The Haftarah says, in that day, I, God, will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the creeping things of the ground. I will also banish bow, sword, and war from Israel. Thus I will let them lie down in safety. It is a beautiful prophetic vision of the world of how it may be. And then Hosea concludes, as was read this morning so beautifully, Veristich li le'olam, veristich li betzedek u'mishpat bechesed u'vrachamim, veristich li be'emunah. Hosea, in the name of God, uses the language of a renewed marriage between God and the people. I will espouse you forever. I will betroth you. Is a better word. I will betroth you forever. I will betroth you with righteousness and justice and with goodness and with mercy. I will betroth you with faithfulness. It is a beautiful language and metaphor. It is filled with hope of a time that will come. And like in any relationship, even in the relationship with God, it flows and it ebbs, but it is firmly based in love. That would be enough for it to make it a nice haftarah and to throw some candy. But the rabbis did something more. They took those words of God reciting a commitment to the Jewish people and allowed us to recite it back to God. To extend the metaphor, it is an exchange of vows under a chuppah, if you will. Now, how does this happen? Well, let's learn a little more about the tefillin. In these cases are the Shema and other texts. Maimonides praises the importance of tefillin for focusing us on being moral people. Maimonides writes in the Mishnah Torah, the holiness associated with tefillin is very great. As long as a person is wearing tefillin on his head and on his arm, he will be humble and God-fearing and will not be drawn to frivolous behavior or empty speech. He will not turn his thoughts to evil matters, but rather will direct his heart towards words of truth and of justice. Truth and justice. That is what we are striving for. The custom of when we wrap the tefillin strap on our hand, specifically around our middle fingers, we recite the words of Hosea back to God. That the rabbis have taken the words of this haftarah and allowed us to recite Verestich li le'olam, Verestich li betzedek u'mishpat, uvchesed uvrachamim, Verestich li be'emunah. We recite it back to God. The words which God said to us in the haftarah are the words that we recite back to God when we put on tefillin. Rabbi Yischar Rubin has written, I find this a great way to think about it. A relationship structure begins to take form in which God wears tefillin that is written in the boxes are praises of people. And we wear tefillin that have God's praises written in them. And through this mutual feeling of wearing the other's praise, we create a unique relationship. I love that idea that the texts inside God's tefillin are about praising humanity. Now, what would God have in God's tefillin about praising us? It might be compassion. It might be inventiveness. It might be kindness. But then as I was thinking about this, every goodness that we do as people, we always find a way to counter it and to prove just the opposite. That we are at our base level have the ability to have so much praise that God, it is even worthy of God praising us, and then we also have the ability to undo that. I believe humanity is on a trajectory of increasing goodness, despite ourselves, though. But as I recited Hosea's verse each time I put on tefillin, I want to understand each line more fully. So first, Verestich li le'olam, that we are betrothed to you forever. Forever. We are in relationship with God. We struggle with each other no matter what the fancy trends of the time are, or of the moment, or of fads, or of inclinations. We are in this relationship with God, even if we don't even understand what God is. We are still with each other. Despite our doubts and our anger, we are in relationship. We act as individuals, and we are also part of a larger fabric of the Jewish people, not just broadly, but throughout time as well. And to understand our place in that and to validate, affirm our place within that relationship, Verestich li le'olam, that we are in this together. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs has spoken beautifully about the need for us to reclaim and to shift from the I culture to the we culture. Second, Verestich li betzedek u'mishpat bechesed uvrachamim, with righteousness and justice and goodness and mercy. I don't know, how are we doing? Great and far less than great. But we are so quick to judge God when we see the perceived lack of justice or mercy in illness or in death or the perceived wrongs. But I wonder, what does God do when we act without righteousness, when we act without justice, without goodness, without mercy? Does God hold us accountable in the same way that we hold God accountable? What if God ignored us as much as we ignore God? These are things I think about as I wind the tefillin strap around my fingers. En verestich li be'emunah, I will betroth you with faithfulness. Rashi says that this faithfulness is that while we were in exile, we believed in the promises that came through the prophets. So despite being in exile, our ancestors believed in this relationship. Despite the difficulties, they believed. And even with the unfaithfulness of some that was shown at the golden calf, they collectively believed. Despite hardships surrounding us daily, every day, we believe that we are part of something greater, that we are part of the Jewish people. Veristichli, I am proud to be part of the Jewish people. Veristichli, I am part of a faith which acknowledges doubt. Veristichli, I am part of a people who will continue to hope and to strive to be our best selves even in the darkest of times. This is how I understand the mutuality of God and the Jewish people each morning that I put on Tefillin. That is why the rabbis took the words of today's Haftarah and put them at the center of our Jewish traditional practices. We are bound together, veristichli, and now we must do our part. Shabbat Shalom.